Hey everybody, Gromos here with some more Warthunder Ground Forces gameplay. Now, before we start with this video, I want to mention really quickly that the next aircraft video will most likely be out next week. A few people asked about it, and the thing is, I simply did not have much time the last few weeks to fly and collect good footage, and I don't want to create a subpar video just to have something out. So the next aircraft video will be uploaded when I have footage worth showing, which, as I said, I expect to be someone next week. Now back to the tanks. Now, I actually did not plan to make a new ground forces video already, but we got a new set of tanks on Tuesday and I of course wanted to try them, and I think I got some decent footage of them in action. And I see no reason to keep it from you. So in this video I will take a look at the Panzer III Ausf and the T-28. Both tanks are medium tanks at tier 1 with a battle rating of 2, so the top end of tier 1. They will face each other a lot and I think they are a good place to start. As always, I take a look at the two tanks and talk a bit about their characteristics and compare the two a bit. Let's start with the Panzer III Ausf. The Ausf, or version F, is the first version of the Panzer III that has a 50mm cannon instead of the 37mm of the earlier Panzer III versions. However, this is not the same 50mm L60 gun we saw in the Panzer III version M we got to test in the last batch of tanks. The cannon in this F version, and also the G and the H version, is a much shorter L42 cannon, so you won't get the same amount of armor penetration in this tank than in later Panzer III versions. Now, I don't think I've explained what the L stands for yet, so in case you don't know, that's the barrel length, or caliber length to be exact. L42 means that the barrel of the gun is 42 times the caliber of the gun, which is 50mm. So the gun has a 2100mm long barrel, or 2.1 meters. The reason this shorter gun was chosen was because the longer barrel of the L60 might have reduced the agility of the tank in urban or densely wooded areas. If you have seen Kelly's Heroes, you know what I mean. But, of course, when the Panzer III started to meet T-34 tanks a year later, the short 5cm L42 proved inadequate and was replaced by the L60 in later versions of the tank. However, in-game, in most cases, the L42 of the F version with its roughly 60mm of armor penetration on 100 meters is still a very potent armament, and few tanks within the current set of tanks have the necessary armor to withstand it. One of them would of course be the already mentioned T-34, which was part of the test on Tuesday to see how the tier 1 tanks would perform against it. But on Thursday's testing session the T-34 was removed again. That leaves only the Stug 3 version A, which has enough frontal armor to withstand the 5cm at medium to long ranges. The Panzer III can penetrate the frontal armor of all other tanks in the current set. So down here at tier 1 the gun is very dangerous. The second best cannon in a turreted tank in the current set of tanks in my opinion, with the one on the T-28 being the best, but we get to that later. On the downside though, because of the smaller caliber of the gun, you often need a few more hits to get a kill than you needed with the 75 to 88mm cannons from the previous testing set. Though that depends on the target of course. A lot of the lower tier tanks are smaller, like the PT-7, which means their crew and important modules are packed tighter, which makes it easier again to destroy enough modules for a kill within one shot. The cannon has the typical selection of ammunition for German anti-tank cannons. You start out with a Panzer 39 armor-piercing round and a high-explosive round, and you can unlock the Panzer 40 APCR round. Now, as I already mentioned, the normal armor-piercing round is perfectly capable of penetrating most tanks on this tier level frontally, with the exception of the T-34 from the Tuesday test and the Sturmgeschütz 3A at longer ranges. With the APCR rounds, the cannon gets a pretty impressive penetration of roughly 90mm at 100 meters, enough to penetrate the T-34's frontal armor at short ranges. However, as always, the APCR round of course does less damage, because it has no explosive filler and the actual tangent penetrator is sub-caliber. I have the impression, however, that the difference is even larger with the smaller caliber 5cm gun than it was with the 75mm cannons, and I think that makes sense. Without an explosive filler, the APCR round can only do damage to things it hits and with the spalling and splintering it creates when penetrating the armor. Now, if you have a round fired from a 75 or 88mm cannon penetrates 75mm or even 100mm of armor, there is a lot more kinetic energy involved and a lot more material available for spalling and splintering, compared to a case where you have a round from a 50 or 37mm gun penetrate 20 to 55mm of armor. There is less kinetic energy involved, and a thinner armor plate hit by a smaller round provides less material for spalling. That's why I think the explosive filler of the round is even more important here at the lower tiers. Now let's take a look at the Panzer III's armor. The tank has 30mm armor protection all around, which makes the Panzer IIIF and E the most well-armored turreted tanks in the Thursday testing set. Only the Stag III has a thicker frontal armor. The T-28 and Panzer IV-C, the other two turreted battle rating 2 tanks in this set, also have 30mm at the front of the hull, but both have thinner side and turret armor. In case of the Panzer IV-C, only 15mm at the side. And thanks to the same armor strength on all sides of the Panzer III, it is very easy to angle in a fight. You can go for a full 45 degrees angle towards the opponent, and angling the tank well can be pretty important. While 30mm all around is pretty good compared to the other tanks at this tier, it is still not much, and most tanks you meet are capable of penetrating it. Even the low muzzle velocity 75mm L24 can penetrate the 30mm armor at medium to low distance if you're not angled, and the 75mm shell will do a lot more damage than your 5cm if it penetrates. So overall I would say the Panzer III, with its good mix of mobility, firepower and protection, is probably the best all-round tank at this battle rating at the moment. But let's take a look at the competition, the T-28 medium tank. The T-28 is, with the exception of the T-26, the oldest tank design we currently have in Warthunder. It entered service in 1933, and back then it was one of the strongest, if not the strongest tank designs available. But of course, weapon development was pretty rapid in this period, and by the time the tank saw action for the first time, the multi-turret design was already pretty outdated. Now the tank has of course 3 turrets. A main turret with a 76.2mm cannon, as well as 2 machine gun turrets at the front. Those extra turrets don't work in the current version of the beta. Machine guns in general are not in yet. However, as I have already said in earlier videos, Gaijin mentioned in interviews and live streams that eventually the extra turrets, as well as every machine gun on the tank, will work. Now let's take a look at the tank's main armament. The main selling point of the tank currently. The T-28 version we have in the beta at the moment has the L10 76.2mm cannon, a shorter version of the L11 in the earlier T-34 and KV-1 tanks. Now, to avoid confusion, L10 and L11 are in this case the designations of the cannons, not the caliber lengths. The 76mm of the T-28 has, according to my information, a caliber length of about 27. So it is a 76.2mm L27 cannon called L10. Now, the shorter L10 of course does not have the same armor penetration capability than the L11, but at this tier level it is still very good. With roughly 65mm penetration at 100 meters, the tank can penetrate everything we currently have in the beta at long ranges with armor-piercing rounds. And it is of course a 76mm gun, which provides much more firepower and has a much bigger chance for a one-shot kill than most of the other turreted tanks have with their 37 to 50mm armaments. I would say that makes the L10 the best tank cannon for turreted tanks in the testing set, and the second best cannon overall after the 57mm cannon of the Cis-30 self-propelled anti-tank gun. There is however one curious thing about the cannon. It is the only tank gun so far in the beta which does not get an anti-tank round right from the start. I of course don't know if it will stay that way, But in the Thursday testing session, the tank started with a high explosive and a shrapnel round available to it. The anti-tank round needed to be unlocked first. As you can see in the gameplay in the background, I have only shrapnel and high explosive shells, as I did not have the armor piercing round unlocked at this point. Now, neither high explosive nor shrapnel rounds are meant to be used against armored targets, so I was a bit skeptical at first how well that might work, and of course it is a bit of a disadvantage at first. However, it turned out that if you meet the right kind of targets, for example lots of Cis-30 or PT-7s, or try to get flanking shots, the shrapnel rounds work quite well. The thing is that this shrapnel round you get for the T-28 does have a bit of armor penetration. Not much 30mm at point blank range, but at least something. The high explosive round of course has an impact fuse, so it will explode on impact and does not have any armor penetration at all. You have to hope for some spalling or external damage. I expected the same from the shrapnel round, and I could not find enough information about this specific round at such short notice to tell you why exactly it has armor penetration. But I assume it was meant to be used against fortifications and has a delayed action fuse because of this. Now, a shrapnel round has of course a small explosive filler surrounded with hundreds of bullets. You can imagine that a shell like that going off inside a tank has devastating effect, and you can see that in this clip. If the shell penetrates, the damage indicator on the right lights up like a Christmas tree. You have a very high chance for a one-shot kill if this round penetrates the target. Of course, only 30mm of penetration limit you quite a bit. You don't want to fire this round at the Panzer III with its all-round 30mm armor, as you would need to hit it at point-blank range at a perfect 90-degree angle to have any chance to get through, and that's not very likely. However, low-tier targets like the PT-7 or the Panzer III can be penetrated from the front, as can the side armor of the Panzer IV, Panzer II and other T-28s. So if you play a bit more careful in the first match or two, or get lucky with your targets, you can do well and get AP rounds unlocked quite fast. And the 76mm armor piercing rounds can get through almost anything at this tier. Now let's take a look at the T-28's armor protection. The T-28 we currently have has the original armor layout. It is not the up-armored E version of the tank. So you have 30mm at the front of the hull and 20mm at the side and on the turret. The turret's front is of course a bit rounded, so the 20mm at the turret's front are a bit more effective because of this. That means the front is similarly well protected than the Panzer III and Panzer IV's front, but the T-28's side is weaker than the Panzer III's side, yet stronger than the side armor of the Panzer IV. Now, the two machine gun turrets have 22mm armor at the front and also 20 at the side. So if you look at it from the front, from a purely armor strength point of view, the machine gun turrets look like weak points. However, it is questionable how much critical damage you can do by firing at the two extra turrets. Sure, some shrapnel might fly down into the fighting compartment, but overall I would say you have a much better chance for real damage if you shoot the hull itself, even if it is 8mm thicker at the front. Now, compared with other tier 1 vehicles, overall the armor is mediocre to good, but of course all the tanks from this era were pretty badly armored, so good armor in comparison with other tier 1 tanks means you still won't bounce much shots. And of course the T-28 is a pretty huge and easy to hit tank. The size of it, however, is a bit of a two-edged sword. As I have said earlier, in smaller tanks the important modules and crew are closer together and therefore easier to take out with one shot. I have the feeling the opposite is true for the T-28. While it is somewhat easy to penetrate, as are most tier 1 tanks, the tank can soak up quite a few hits, and I think the size of it is the reason for this. It is harder to destroy enough critical modules with one hit to one-shot the tank than a smaller tank. You have to get used to driving a damaged tank though, since it is often hard to avoid getting hit in this big tank. Now, as far as mobility goes, this tank is okay. It is faster than you might expect from such a huge bucket, and it has a 500 horsepower engine. But it does weigh 28 tons, that is 8 tons heavier than the Panzer IIIF, and the suspension system is outdated. So overall the T-28 is of course slower and less agile than the Panzer III versions we have in the beta at the moment. Also, the turret traverse is pretty slow, so you have to be careful not to get outmaneuvered at close range. Now let's compare the T-28 and the Panzer IIIF a bit. In general, I would say the Panzer III is the better all-rounder, with not much weak points. The T-28 on the other hand shines thanks to its 76mm cannon, which at this tier provides the tank with an impressive firepower, and the T-28 seems to be able to soak up more damage than most other tanks at this tier. Though thanks to its size, reduced agility and weaker sight in turret armor, it will also take more damage most of the time than the Panzer III. This time I find it hard to pick one of the two as my favorite. I like hit and run style attacks and being mobile, so the Panzer IIIF's mobility is a plus. At the flip side, hit and run works great if you have a cannon that has a very good chance of killing the opponent in one shot and you can move on to the next target right away. The Panzer III's 5cm often lets you down in this regard. But in the end, I like mobile tanks, and that means the more versatile 3F fits my playstyle better. Well then, that was a look at the Panzer IIIF and the T-28. And this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.